You're listening to Uncovering Dark Falls, currently the #1 rated podcast in Dark Falls. But, not a lot of people live here, so it is what it is. About 41 degrees north and roughly 75 degrees west, there's an old, abandoned payphone standing on the outskirts of Dark Falls. I'm pretty sure anyone listening to this is wondering why I drove out to the middle of nowhere just to find this particular payphone. And you know what? To tell you the truth, the series of events that led me out here all started with a bizarre Reddit comment. The now deleted comment was made by an anonymous Reddit user on r/cryptids, and it read, quote, "I know no one is going to believe me, but back when I was a kid, I used to live in this odd town called Dark Falls. There were always strange rumors and conspiracies going around our little town for as long as I can remember. I never really believed them at first, as I thought they were just, stories, made up by the older kids to terrify the younger kids. But that was until I saw something that I couldn't explain with my very own eyes. It's hard to put into words, but it happened late one night. I'd been out, playing with my friends, and I was making my way back home when I saw another kid from school going to make a call at a deserted payphone at the edge of town. I recognized him from biology, and even though we'd never spoken before, I think his name was Jared. I wondered who he could have been calling at this hour and why he had to come all the way out here to this particular payphone to make the call. But before I could walk up to him and ask, something bizarre happened. As I said, I'd seen him walk into that payphone booth, but in the seconds that followed, I couldn't recognize Jared anymore. His skin had turned scaly, and his mouth had grown 3 times in size, I swear. The thing that now stood there wasn't a middle school kid, but an anthropomorphic reptile-like creature standing on its hind legs, making a phone call. I remember letting out a muffled scream before running in the opposite direction. I was never the same after that. I avoided Jared around town, and I begged my parents to change my school. They eventually agreed, thankfully, and once I was done with high school, I quickly left Dark Falls and never came back. People tell me that I'm insane whenever I talk about this, because I think they just assume I was seeing things that, wasn't really there. But I know for a fact that I didn't hallucinate any of that, and I know what I saw. I can still remember the location of that payphone, and I think about going back to face it now that I'm an adult, but the thought of that night still terrifies me. Regardless of whether you believe me or not, every single thing I said was true. Those things that are morphing their appearance to look human, just like Jared, are still living among us. And I know the truth is out there." End quote. That was a big one. Thank you for sticking with me. Now, several other anonymous accounts, which I believe were the same person, had also made similar comments on subreddits like, r/high strangeness, r/conspiracy, r/paranormal, and r/the truth is out there, sharing the coordinates of the payphone before hastily deleting them. So, you know me. I had to go check it out. I know you're going to think that I'm crazy for believing some maniac on Reddit and wasting the weekend going into the boonies to check out if his ramblings are true or not, but I really do believe that this comment actually connects to a pretty disturbing case that occurred in Dark Falls in 1997. My investigation into this peculiar case first began when I came across a 28-year-old diary that belonged to a 12-year-old girl named Tasha McClain. It was pink, decorated in flowers, and it had a worn-out lock and a warning scribbled in red that read, quote, "This diary is the property of Tasha McClain. To any snoopers or nosy people, it's private, so back off, or else you'll be cursed and turned into a frog if you choose to read any further. This also applies to you, Josh." End quote. Under normal circumstances, I would never commit the cardinal sin of reading a girl's private diary. Unlike Josh, who I'm assuming was, maybe an older sibling who had snooped through it several times in the past, I respected the privacy of a woman's personal thoughts. However, this situation was different. I had to commit this grave offense because the pages in this pink diary, they held the story and they painted a clear picture of the bizarre events that happened in this town all those years ago in '97. I was ready to face the consequences of my cardinal sin if it meant getting to the bottom of this case. Besides, there was a bright side to all of this. If Tasha's curse turned out to be real, and let's say I did turn into a frog, I'm not paying any more taxes. That's not my thing anymore. I don't have to do that, no more rent. I'll just go hop around. Find a lily pad to hang out on, Which in my humble opinion seemed like, let's call it a reasonable trade. So with all that said, I opened the diary and I started reading. I skipped a lot of the earlier and more personal stuff because even though I was being a Josh and snooping, I decided to do it with some level of decency. I quickly flipped all the way to the month of September, which had the particular entries that I'd been looking for. It was early fall in 1997 when it all started. It was also just the first few weeks after the kids in Dark Falls had all come back to school from the long summer. Tasha's first entry during this period was dated September 12th, 97, and at exactly 4:15 p.m. that Friday, she detailed the events that happened at school. She says, quote, "I finally did it. I finally fired that creep, Ricky Beamer. I truly hated it ever since he joined our school newspaper, the Harding Herald, and being the newspaper's editor, I had to put up with him. Now, I'm not heartless, as I really did give Ricky a chance to show me that he was Harding Herald material, but the bumbling fool just kept on messing up and pulling these silly pranks that just made me mad. God, he's such a weirdo. And today, during one of his silly pranks, he spilled soda all over my keyboard. I was infuriated, and I initially fired him on the spot. But then I remembered that I still needed this creep to take photos for this year's children's car wash campaign that was happening the next morning. It was a true emergency, and we really needed those pictures for the paper. So I had to call Ricky to go get them. I told him this was his last chance, and I even gave him my father's expensive camera since he didn't have one, and I warned him to return it without a scratch or he'd be fired for good this time, and I meant it. I really don't know what I was thinking, trusting him with my dad's camera or to get me any decent pictures. The only reason that I considered him was because I was desperate, and I believed that his pea-brain would be able to pull off this very simple task. But I was wrong. He came back today with no pictures, and Dad's camera was now badly damaged and soaked with water. He claimed that it was my fellow 8th graders, Brenda, Jared, Wart, and David, who were his so-called enemies, that had attacked him and destroyed the camera, so I should blame them, is what he said. I didn't believe a word of his usual lies and excuses here. So just like I promised, I told him that he'd blown his final chance and he was permanently off of the paper for good. I'm glad I don't have to see his face again or deal with any more of his shenanigans. But knowing that little twat, he'll probably pull some stupid revenge prank to get back at me for firing him. But little does he know that I'm always 2 steps ahead of his puny 6th grader mind. After all, I'm Tasha McClain, and no one can pull a fast one without me seeing it coming from miles away. End quote. That was a big one. I could deduce from this first entry that Tasha might not be the sweet girl that I'd imagined she was, but rather a full-blown bully. Now, I know I wasn't in any position to judge her as I was reading her diary, after all, which also made me an icky person, but I kind of sympathize with Ricky because I had also suffered at the hands of many girls similar to Tasha in middle school. That said, the first entry hadn't really shed any more light on the case, so I went a little bit further to see what Tasha had written on the 19th of September, just a few days later. It had been about a week since that initial entry, and at exactly 3 p.m. that afternoon, Tasha started a new entry detailing the events of that week. She goes on to write, quote, "I knew that twat would try to pull something, and I was right. Ricky had somehow snuck into the school last night, got a hold of my final edit for the Harding Herald school newspaper, and altered it by adding a sneaky little message that said, 'Calling all creeps. Calling all creeps. If you're a real creep, call Tasha at 555-6709 after midnight.'" This was supposed to be his big revenge plan after I'd fired him from the newspaper? Tisk tisk. Luckily for me, I'd seen it in time before we ran the paper. I figured, what a better way to get back at that sneaky little weasel than to use his own plan against him. You should have seen the look on his face when he found out that I'd switched the details of that silly message to his name and his phone number. His stupid prank completely backfired, and I'd heard that he'd received calls from weirdos all night. I even saw one of the 8th graders chuck a paper ball at him during lunchtime. I know that this will teach him to never mess with Tasha McClain again. End quote. As I read through Tasha's second entry, I was reminded of my days in middle school and how cruel some kids really can be. I wondered how Ricky felt in this moment and how that year must have been just pure hell for him. However, as I flipped towards Tasha's third entry, written 5 days after that one, it was September 24th, I believe, I realized that Tasha's revenge was short-lived, and in the following days, things had taken a much more sinister turn that I don't think anybody could have ever seen coming. The third entry, written on September 24th, 97, at exactly 6:27 p.m., Tasha begins with, quote, "I'm not crazy. I know I'm not crazy. But something extremely weird happened today that made me question my sanity. It all started when I noticed something off at school, as for some unknown reason, people had stopped picking on that loser, Sicky Ricky. I really thought switching the details of his message would have surely made everyone at school continue picking on him for the whole year. But my revenge didn't even last for an entire day. What's even weirder is that Brenda, David, Wart, and Jared, who were supposedly Ricky's sworn enemies in the 8th grade and the main people who made his life hell, had somehow started hanging around him and following him around like he's their leader or something. Have they all gone mad? The twerp's in the 6th grade, for heaven's sake. Now usually, Ricky's only friend that I would see him hang out with at school was this loser new girl called Iris Candler, who I thought was the only person weird enough to be friends with that freak. But now he's rolling with the 8th graders? It was pretty suspicious. So I followed them into the forest close to school, as I'd seen them all sneakily enter there when school was over to have a secret conversation. Now here comes the weird part. Brenda, David, Wart, and Jared all started apologizing to Ricky and calling him Commander. I mean, what? I couldn't make out most of their conversation, as I didn't want to get too close, but from what I could hear, they all said something about how they were creeps who were on a mission to put humans in the past and lead the creeps to the future. The craziness doesn't stop there. They also told Ricky about a plan to plant mind-controlling identity seeds into the macaroni at the cafeteria that would turn all of the kids into creeps just like them, with Ricky as their all-powerful commander. I really thought that they'd either all gone insane or they were just taking the piss and messing with Ricky. But this is where things get a little fuzzy. I'd overheard their conversation, and I decided to take a closer peek to see exactly what was going on, and what I saw made me pass out. I know I'm not crazy, and it was probably some hallucination from a plant or tree in the forest that made me see things, but I could have sworn that standing in the forest surrounding Ricky were 4 human-like lizards with purple skin and long, scaly tongues, all wearing the same clothes as Wart and David and Brenda and Jared, and they all spoke exactly like they did too. And before I could scream, I passed out from the sight of those creatures, and when I woke up, they were all gone. And I ran home, and I hid under my covers. I didn't even eat any dinner or tell my parents what I had seen because I knew that they'd just call me crazy. But I'm not. It feels like my mind is breaking in two, and my sanity is crumbling apart, even though I still can't explain what I saw, or at least what I think I saw. All I know for certain is that something bizarre is going on at my school, and that freak Ricky Beamer is at the center of everything. End quote. Tasha's fourth and final journal entry was made on the 27th of September, the very next night. It was penned around 8 p.m. that Saturday, and to my surprise, this entry was somehow even crazier than the last. As Tasha recalled her thoughts about the day's events, she writes, quote, "I threw up several times today. I don't know what's real or what's fiction anymore, and that Ricky Beamer boy has ruined my whole life. Against my better judgment, I followed him and his new crew again into the woods to see what they were up to, and if I could get some sort of evidence of their bizarre putting strange seeds in the school's food plan to report them to a teacher or something. But what I found out was far worse than that. It turns out that Ricky's weirdo friend Iris is the assistant commander, whatever that means, in their organization of creeps, and they all hatched a new plan to get people to ingest their so-called identity seeds after their original plan with the macaroni failed, since, nobody at my school eats the macaroni. Apparently, this new plan was to put the seeds in some baked goods at the bake sale on Saturday. I tried to get a bit closer so I could hear what baked good they'd planned to put the seeds into, but I stepped on a branch and they heard me. I started sprinting as fast as I could before they could find me, hoping that I could uncover whatever they were planning at the bake sale. When the bake sale arrived, I didn't want to eat anything, but my mother urged me to have some cookies that a sweet girl in the 6th grade had made, who I later discovered was Iris. I felt sick to my stomach, and I wanted to confront Ricky about it, but that's when he got on the podium and urged everyone not to eat the cookies, claiming they were riddled with mind-controlling identity seeds. Everyone just laughed at him. They all started throwing food at him to get him off the podium. I then saw Brenda, David, Wart, and Jared pull Ricky aside and tell him something that made him change his mind. He had done a complete 180, and now he starts urging all the kids at school to eat the cookies. He even ate one himself, with a sinister grin spreading across his face. I thought about confronting him. I even thought about telling somebody, but I knew that nobody would believe me, so I just went home and I threw up. I'm still not sure what's going on, or if all of this is just some elaborate prank by Ricky to get his revenge on me for firing him. But all I know is I would rather eat my own hair than turn into a filthy, mind-controlled purple lizard in Ricky Beamer's creep army. I still wasn't sure if I'd thrown up all the seed-infused cookies that Ricky's assistant commander Iris had made, and I decided that I would be monitoring my skin for any purple scales in the following days. I know, I'm already sounding insane, but if for some reason I don't write in my own diary again, just know that I failed, and the real Tasha McLean is gone. If everything that I've heard is true, I would have been replaced by a purple-skinned lizard, and there's no doubt in my mind that the culprit is that creep, Ricky Beamer." End quote. there were no more entries in Tasha's diary after this one. I truly had no words when I was done reading it because I couldn't tell if it was all some, elaborate fantasy or role-playing game concocted by the kids at their school. But that explanation didn't make any sense because Tasha didn't strike me as this creative LARPing type. I then started to think that maybe they were all just a bunch of conspiracy nuts. I mean, after all, there was a whole lizard people or reptilian conspiracy in the late 90s. It saw a growing number of people believing that shape-shifting reptilians secretly controlled the world's governments. But again, Tasha McClain did not fit the conspiracy nut profile. Now, what's even weirder is that there were some odd reports from numerous parents saying how their kids suddenly started acting weird after that bake sale. One report came from a father named Mr. Becker who said, quote, "I don't really recognize my own son anymore. Ever since that bake sale, Mark has been acting differently. He stopped playing baseball, which he loves so much, and he just locks himself in his room all day, rarely talking to me or anybody at all. He just makes these weird phone calls to some new friend he's made at school late at night." End quote. Another report from a woman named Mrs. Valerie Miller stated, quote, "My daughter has been acting extremely odd lately. She always used to be so introverted and reclusive, but it seems like she's made some friends at the bake sale. Don't get me wrong, I was happy for her at first, but there's something off about her new friends as they keep calling her to come and hang out in the woods every day after school, and I'm starting to get a bit worried about it." End quote. Even with all of these eerie reports, I still believed the strange behavior could be chalked up to coincidence. I mean, who could say for certain if these kids were actually transforming into anthropomorphic reptiles? Or maybe they were just going through, puberty. Who knows, man? That said, while I really don't think the details of this outlandish Dark Falls case will ever be confirmed, or if there are really anthropomorphic reptiles walking among us, the mysterious entries of Tasha McClain's diary have still left me with this lingering thought at the back of my mind every time I enter a bar or get into a lift in Dark Falls. I can't help but wonder if my bartender, or, the Uber driver or whatever, is secretly an anthropomorphic reptile who's planning on feeding me mind-controlling identity seeds so I can become part of the great mission. I know it sounds silly. I know that. And it's a bit of a stretch, but now that I'm thinking about it, I really don't think I'd be mad if something like that happened. I've always wanted to be part of something bigger, or join like a niche club. And even if all the members are called creeps, I still think I'd be able to fit in pretty well. Because, just like Ricky Beamer, I too was often called a creep during the hellish experience that we all know as middle school. Would it be so bad, if you think about it? Maybe it'll happen one day. Maybe it won't. We'll see. I left out something about the Reddit posts that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Not all of them have this, but a few of them did. Something about a magic shop. Now, as far as I know, there's only one magic shop in town, and I wonder if this has something to do with the reptile thing, or if it's got its own little unsolved mystery just waiting for me to fall into it, I think the next time I drive past this magic shop, I'm actually going to get in and just have a poke around, see what I can learn. Until next time, this is Uncovering Dark Falls, and I've been Gideon Brooks. See you next week. Hey, I want to say thank you so much for listening to this episode of Uncovering Dark Falls. I'm going to list off a few very cool things that I would love if you did, at least one of them. Probably the most important one would be joining the Patreon. For $5 a month, you're going to get early access to every episode, behind-the-scenes content, and maybe most importantly, voting privileges. If you've not picked up on this, or if you're new here, we're retelling Goosebumps stories. There's 3 people involved with the podcast, and we all just love and adore Goosebumps so much, but we need help figuring out which mysteries and which stories you want us to cover next. You can vote on those. Additionally to that, whatever podcast platform you're listening on probably has a rating option or a review option or even a comment option. I bet it's got a share option as well. Pick one of those. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Uncovering Dark Falls is written by David Caleb and Dr. Plague. Created, produced, and narrated by Darek Weber.